Dr. Pam Popper. I'm from Wellness Forum Health in Columbus, Ohio, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Most of these people have chronic degenerative conditions like type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease. We've seen a couple of really disturbing trends. One is lower and lower ages of onset of disease. We have second graders with type 2 diabetes, high school kids with rheumatoid arthritis. And of course, the population's getting fatter and sicker. It's rare to see a normal weight person in our office today. I want to talk a little bit about inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease. With Crohn's disease, the inflammation can develop anywhere in the gastrointestinal tract, from the mouth all the way through the body. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. And I'll start with some information from about our friend Fauci, and it's part of the ongoing series, just a new installment in the Why Does Fauci Still Have a Job? On May 12th, Fauci told members of the U.S. Senate that cities and states could see more COVID-19 deaths and economic damage if they lift the stay-at-home orders too early and too quickly. He urged extreme caution, and he even stated that children may not be able to go back to school.
Hi, this is John Cullen, and welcome to another episode of Heroes of the Pandemic. In this episode, it gives me great pleasure, and it's a great honor to introduce Dr. Pam Popper to my audience. Dr. Pam, say hello to the...
Hello.
I am John Cullen. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so grateful for your time and for taking the time to speak with the audience and share with them a little bit about your journey through this pandemic. I think the audience is somewhat familiar with your work and your website. It's important that we do a quick disclaimer and make sure that the audience understands that we're not going to give any medical information here. The only So the only recommendations we're going to give you is to go to Moderna, go to Pfizer, go to Moderna.com, go to Pfizer.com, go to the CDC.gov, go to the FDA.gov, and go to the WHO.org. And that's where you'll find all the official information. Pam is the founder and the president of the Wellness Forum Health, and that, I believe, is in Ohio. Is that right?
Right. We do business in 33 countries, but we're based in Ohio.
So my sympathies for you, to you regarding the weather. I think you're in the midst of some Arctic blast and 9 feet of snow or something ridiculous. So my sympathies to you.
No, it's melting finally, but yeah, it's winters in Ohio are always fun.
Now, you have served or are serving on the Physician Steering Committee and the President's Board for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in Washington. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and some of the work that you've done there and some of the folks that you've had the opportunity to work with?
Yeah, I just finished my board term. Of course, I'm always going to support this organization. I've been associated with them for 25 years in one form or another. And this was a really good introduction to activism for me, because this group has really gotten things done. They managed to end animal testing at EPA by the year 2024. They've sued the federal government over the dietary guidelines. They've sued the dairy industry for false claims. They've worked very hard to end animal testing in medical schools, which really doesn't accomplish very much. I mean, 85 or 89% of drugs that work on animals or vaccines don't work on humans. It's just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. So I've had the opportunity to learn from Neil Barnard, the founder of the organization, who I think is one of the best in terms of standing up for principles, filing lawsuits when it's time to file lawsuits, and a winning game. I mean, this guy is amazingly effective at what he does. So I had an opportunity to work with some of the best for the years that I was on the board.
That's incredible. And you have certified instructors that work in your organization that have been certified in
Right.
nutrition, and they're all over the world, right? You've got instructors literally, I'm looking at the list right now, they're everywhere.
They are. The biggest thing, some of mine, there are a couple of things. First of all, I wrote a book that was very popular, still is popular, actually, called Food Over Medicine, the conversation that can save your life. And it really is a blueprint for how to deal with medicine, making informed medical decisions. And I have certified instructors to teach the material in the book, literally all over the world. My primary company, Wellness Forum Health, we also have affiliates who we've trained, and they're medical doctors and dietitians and nurses and even lay people who've been trained in informed medical decision making, which is it should not be a new idea, but my idea 25 years ago, and I will, before I leave the planet, this will be a law that you have to do it this way. People should know the risks and benefits associated with any form of intervention, medical intervention, before making a decision as to whether to proceed. And here in the United States, if you buy a house and a mortgage lender fails to tell you the interest rate and the property taxes and all that sort of thing, if they do that a lot, they can go to jail. And here it is with medicine. You can have a toxic vaccine filled with adjuvants you don't know about. You can consent to a surgery where the success rate's 3%. Nobody has to tell you that. And so our premise from the get-go, we've been in business for 25 years, is please let us show you how to buy healthcare the way you buy houses and cars and retirement accounts and appliances and college educations for your kids, where you check things out before you act. I mean, the obvious exception is if you're in an emergency situation. If my head's bleeding on the sidewalk, I mean, I don't want to look into things and do research, but 99% of all healthcare decisions are made in non-emergency situations where you really do have time to figure out what your options are and the risks and benefits of those. And so we teach informed medical decision making to consumers, and then we certify people how to help consumers to go through this process of learning how to do it.
I'm showing the audience your website right now and the book, Food Over Medicine. And you guys can get this at drpampopper.com. And you can also connect with Dr. Popper at her website. And she's on Facebook and Twitter and BitChute and YouTube. And your YouTube channel is turned into quite the phenomenon at this point. I mean, you're cranking out videos and you've got a lot of subscribers right now. So
yeah, I got suspended for a week. I must be doing something right.
Yeah, welcome to the club. I'm not even going to ask you what you said because it'll get us both kicked off. So,
right.
But can you tell the audience a little bit about your journey and your engagement from what you were doing to, I guess at some point, cognitive dissonance kicked in with you on this coronavirus thing, and something seemed amiss. And can you kind of bring us back to, when did it kind of hit you that maybe what you were being told and what you were witnessing were not necessarily the same thing?
The day it started, that's when. And I'll tell you why. I think the first thing is that I've been in the healthcare business for 25 years. And for 25 years, I've watched medical tyranny get worse. Okay, medical tyranny to me is when a hospital says to a nurse, you can't work here unless you get a vaccine. Medical tyranny is when a psychiatrist says, if you don't give your 5-year-old Risperdal for his behavior problems, then I'm going to report you to Child Protective Services and take your kid away. And they do that, Medical tyranny is when a state passes a law saying that your child has to have several dozen vaccines before he can be enrolled in school. And I've watched this for decades. And so that's the first thing. What we are experiencing right now is actually the hugest episode of medical tyranny in the history of mankind when it comes right down to it. The second thing that I'll tell you is that medicine has been careening toward disaster in terms of this, of just being truthful as opposed to hurting people. I mean, a couple of things I'll mention to you. We had a fake pandemic in 2009 and 10. There was a big to-do about it, and a lot of people didn't pay attention to it, but the CDC declared a pandemic, and so did the World Health Organization.
This is believed to be ground zero in the swine flu outbreak. La Gloria, a remote Mexican farming village that time forgot and that the world would never know but for a 5-year-old boy who was very, very sick with swine flu a month ago.
High as the death toll rises in Mexico's capital city. The worried line up for testing, their faces covered with masks. The government in this city of 20 million closed all public places, including schools, in a desperate attempt to stop the spread of this strain of flu never seen before.
Our concern has grown since yesterday.
With more than 1,000 people sick in Mexico and 8 recent cases in the U.S. concentrated in 2 border states, 2 near San Antonio, Texas, and 6 near San Diego, California, U.S. health officials are watching this outbreak closely. More than 600,000 people cross the U.S.-Mexico border each day, and the CDC fears it's too late for containment.
As a precautionary step, the CDC is working to develop a vaccine seed strain specific to these recent swine influenza viruses in humans.
The president talked about parents and businesses having a contingency plan in case more children need to stay home from school. Do you know exactly what he means by contingency plan?
Well, yes, I do. For example, that a parent whose child's school is closed out of a precaution, or because there has been a confirmed case of flu, should not take that child then to a daycare center. They're going to have to take them home, and the hope is that the employers will be generous in terms of how they treat that employee's necessary action of taking the child home and not being at work. And so the urging is the contingency plans the businesses should have if this hits in a way that their employees have to care for their children.
And as it turned out, it was all to get people to get the vaccine, the flu vaccine. $18 billion got wasted during that period of time. But nothing bad happened to anybody. Have you ever noticed that nobody loses their job over this stuff? They just keep marching on and everything goes on the way it was before. So they tried it before and gotten away with it. That was a clue. But I think the biggest thing, it just smelled bad from the beginning. And when I started seeing that real data wasn't being shown, that this was the biggest episode of hiding information that I'd seen. And believe me, they're good at doing it. I knew something was terribly wrong. So I put out a video in early March saying really what was going on, and I could not believe the backlash I got. And then you can go back and watch that video. Everything I said was exactly what happened.
I understand. Well, your journey into this, and then I guess you kind of come to a culmination in that now there's lawsuits. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and what these are about and who's on each side? Because I find this fascinating.
A group in Ohio is suing the government, saying it has violated laws and the Constitution in the way it reports the number of positive COVID-19 cases and deaths, as well as testing and lockdown procedures. One of the attorneys representing the group joins us today. That's Thomas Renz, lead attorney for COVID fraud lawsuits. Good to see you, sir. Thomas, thanks so much for coming on. Attorneys, doctors, several citizens' rights groups have joined together to file 3 lawsuits, a kind of lawsuits challenging the entire premise of COVID-19 testing, death numbers, business and church shutdowns, mask mandates, vaccines. Walk me through what you found.
Well, a lot, to be honest. What we found is that according to the CDC and their documents, the intent of the data recording was to basically increase the number of COVID cases, which they've done quite successfully. The people who are being reported as dying from COVID are not dying from COVID, they're dying with COVID. And there's a substantial difference there, because if you die with COVID, you could be hit by a bus and have COVID in your system and be reported as a COVID death. If you die from COVID, that means it is the disease that caused the death. And so it's a big difference.
How are you finding this information? How do you go about finding this sort of information? Because there's a lot of questions about COVID deaths and how they are reported.
So we're actually using CDC data. Everything in our case is cited. We are using CDC documents, CDC data. It's there. You have to dig for it, though. It's well hidden, and it's interesting to see because what they say publicly and in the media is substantially different than what they're actually putting on print. The procedures and processes that they've laid out on paper that are required to be followed by law, those are vastly different than what you're hearing in the media.
All right, Thomas Renz joining us live there with those details. You have 3 lawsuits going. We'll continue to follow the details on that. Hope to bring you back in to find out the results of that. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, so when this all started, I never agreed with the first lockdown, but I didn't really understand it was going to turn into all this. So I said, we can survive that. And then I think about mid-April, I was starting to get really suspicious that this was not going to go away. I thought it was going to be another thing like 2009, 2010, just bigger, but it didn't go away. And then I decided that this was going to be as big as it was. And so I started this organization called Make Americans Free Again. And I started it to accomplish a couple of things. And one of them is that if you go back to this medical tyranny that's been gathering steam and getting worse over the years, one of the reasons is because these very entrenched politicians at the state level who have perpetrated a lot of this on us, you can't get rid of them. We've never had the capacity to get rid of them. And people are protesting, and they sign petitions and declarations, and they go have meetings with their legislators. And and people did that during this pandemic too. This all started last spring and summer, people thinking, I'm just going to talk to my elected officials and they will understand that this is terrible and they'll stop doing it. Well, they didn't stop doing it, right? Well, so I started this organization because we have got to be able to go district by district and county by county and tell our elected officials, if you don't do what I say, we're going to vote you out. And I brought the boxes with me of registered voters that show that I can take you out. And if I had been able to do that with our legislature last summer, they would have impeached the governor because it was an election year. And they had impeachment articles drafted, but they couldn't get the votes. And if I could have sat down, for example, with my useless senator and said, look, I've got 29,000 people in your district, all right? You won your election by 15 votes the last time. If you don't vote for impeachment, you are out of here. And I brought the evidence that I can do it. So the first thing is we started amassing this huge voting database that by 2022, if we can't get rid of these people, shame on us, because we've got a couple of years to get ready to do it. But the second thing is I really looked at all these lawsuits that were getting filed, thousands of them lost. Most of them lost. And the reason was people were claiming that their constitutional rights were being violated, which they are, but the government would come back and say, but it's an emergency. And then the judge would say, well, yeah, they got a lot of power. So I started having these thoughts that what we needed to do was challenge the head of the beast, the emergency declaration itself. And as luck would have it, you don't know me very well, but I'm a very, very lucky person. It's like I think about something and then somehow it happens for me, right? So as luck would have it, I get a phone call like within a few days from a guy by the name of Jason Hedges here in Ohio. And he had the same thought. He's a school psychologist. And he had started an organization too. So we cooked up this great idea. How about Make Americans Free Again as the national organization, and Ohio Stands Up as the Ohio organization. We'll work together. He had an attorney, Tom Renz, who is one of the best legal minds I've ever met. And Tom really understood we had to go after the heart of the problem, the emergency declaration. So we filed our first lawsuit in Ohio on August 31st of last year. And what was really interesting about it is that our state was the first to shut down. We were the model in Ohio. And I look back on it, and I'll tell you why I think that is. I think it's because our very popular governor was a Republican governor in a conservative state, plays well on TV. And every Sunday, they paraded him out like he was somebody's, pet. And he said all the right things. So we were going to be, there was a second lockdown. We knew that was coming. We had good intel on that. We should have been the first state, only we didn't shut down the second time at all. So we know our lawsuit had an impact. It's not wonderful living in Ohio, even aside from the snow and ice, but we have had a lot less of our freedoms taken away. We have since filed in New Mexico. We're getting ready to file in 3 more states very soon. We have filed against the federal government, and we filed for a temporary restraining order against the federal government from using PCR testing and the fake death certificate crap that they dreamed up. And we're waiting for a court date on that. So that's what we've gotten done since the last summer.
That's amazing. And again, I'm incredibly grateful for what you're doing and the commitment that you're making for your fellow citizens that you haven't met. And you're doing a lot of altruistic work for people that you don't know, and we're all grateful for that. And what I'm hoping I can do is augment your case with the evidence that I've been able to uncover with the help of my audience. I do a show every Friday with Jason Goodman called Crowdsource the Truth. And Jason came up with this notion where, we can broadcast stuff, but if the audience brings back findings, it gets very powerful. And so I now have about 35,000 subscribers, which is nothing compared to you. But Jason has 120,000. And we do shows every Friday, and the audience brings back material that we then assemble. And so much of what I'm sharing with you is the result of having an audience of critical thinkers, an audience of people who are looking and questioning and finding. And what we've been able to do is almost like an information militia, if you will, is pull all this together. And it's very, it's quite compelling. And again, what I'm hoping is it can maybe expand the scope of the cases that you're bringing. So in other words, if you were to ask the attorney, what are the, the foundational elements of the case, I'm hoping the evidence that I'm going to share with you today maybe puts a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak. So
yes.
So that's
we appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's the idea.
I've had the same experience that you've had, where people who watch my YouTube channel, it's like having 100,000 reporters out there looking for things, and I would never have been able to get all the local intel. People are sending me information from, states all over the country. I've never been to Idaho. Well, I have been to Idaho, but not for a long time. But to know what's going on in Idaho and little towns in Utah and Northern California versus Southern California and the sentiment of the people, it's also been very interesting to get a handle on in addition to data. But I think it shows us how interested people are in this in terms of seeing it for what it is and understanding the mission. We have got to get ourselves out from under this because it will get a whole lot worse. It isn't like we're just going to stay like this as bad as it is. It's going to get worse if we don't take our country back, our government back, our lives back, and make sure that this never happens again. That's a big part of what motivates me right now, is I'll tell you what I think about when I'm up at night wandering the floors is what if the person who replaces Mr. Fauci decides that, there are an awful lot of traffic fatalities. So I think what we're going to have to do is just get everybody off the roads for about 6 or 8 months until we figure it out, and we'll starve to death. I mean, but it's not any crazier, really, than what we're doing right now. So I think we've got to get this subjective, what is a pandemic, who can declare it, how long does it go on, where's the oversight? All of that has got to get settled by the end of the day so that this cannot happen again.
That's exactly right. And I think that is sort of at the heart of the matter. And at the heart of the matter as well is, what is it? What did we just witness in the last year? And why are there so many anomalies? Why are there so many inconsistencies? Now, what do I mean? What do I mean by that? And that's what we're going to take a look at. So, your background in medicine and nutrition and health and the body and all that kind of stuff, I know nothing about that. I've been busy spending my life working with maps and numbers and data. And 30-something years ago, I was the program lead to put this map system together. Let me share this with you again one more time here. I was the program lead to put the system itself together 30-something years ago. And when I saw how the map was being used and how it was being portrayed, or how the data was being portrayed with the map, I said, well, who put this together? They don't know what they're doing. This is wrong. You don't do it like this. You don't do it like this. Why would you do it like this? This is totally not the way you would do it. Now, why would I say that? It's important that we do a quick disclaimer and make sure that the audience understands that we're not going to give any medical information here. The only so the only recommendations we're going to give you is to go to Moderna, go to Pfizer, go to Moderna.com, go to Pfizer.com, go to the CDC.gov, go to the FDA.gov, and go to the WHO.org. And that's where you'll find all the official information. Okay, so Moderna, right now we're at the Moderna website, modernatx.com. And this site is intended for U.S. vaccination providers only. Okay. And what this says from Moderna is the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine has not been approved or licensed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And then it goes on to tell you about emergency use stuff. But the net of it is it's not been approved or licensed by the FDA. And that's how they start. And that's from Moderna. Okay, so I want to make sure that the audience understands that we're not giving any advice. We're simply pointing them to, go to the manufacturers. Go read what Moderna has to say. Go to Pfizer. See what Pfizer has to say. Go to the WHO. Right, so if you go to worldhealthorganization.org, you'll see that the WHO recommends against using remdesivir. Now, remdesivir is the only approved therapeutic treatment in the United States. It was developed for Ebola, but not approved for Ebola. So one of the things that I've always found fascinating is why would a therapeutic treatment for an Ebola virus have any efficacy on a coronavirus? And should we be then checking chicken pox? Should we be checking varicella? Should we be checking zoster virus? Should we be, right? Why are we checking different viruses and therapeutic treatments for Ebola should work on corona? Why would that be? And if so, let's go get a whole bunch of other viral therapeutics and try them. Right? Why would the Ebola one work? But the WHO says it doesn't work. The WHO says, no, this remdesivir is really not doing anything. But it's the only approved therapeutic in the United States, according to this, the FDA.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it's not oral. It's intravenous. So it's...
Right.
Okay.
And part of the reason is that Mr. Fauci's board on the NIH, I think 8 or 9 people are from Gilead, the maker of Remdesivir.
Really? And, are you certain about that? Because I don't want to make any false accusations. It's allegedly, right? So allegedly. Allegedly.
I wrote about it in my book. I referenced it in my book, COVID Operation.
Oh, okay.
By the time, one thing that has, and I'm sure you know this, many times when somebody makes a public statement or it comes out in a book or whatever, then they hurriedly rearrange everything in order to make it go away. But, But he had one of my business partners who wrote extensively about this also disclosed those conflicts of interest. And so, that's one of the reasons why that's a very popular drug here in the United States, even though the WHO says it's not very effective, and it isn't very effective.
Well, my understanding,
just to make it look good.
Well, my understanding is Gilead was going to have to throw it away because it was not approved for Ebola. It was heading to the scrap pile. And then it was the only approved therapeutic for coronavirus.
Right.
But then the WHO says it doesn't work.
That's happened at NIAID before because, when the HIV/AIDS crisis happened.
Tell the audience what NIAID is. The audience may not know what NIAID is.
It's the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. It's a division of the National Institutes of Health. And everything we're seeing right now is a replay of what has happened in the past. Mr. Fauci has been the head of that agency for decades. And back in several decades ago, 1980s and 90s, when the AIDS crisis was going on, he's latched onto this cockamamie idea about HIV causing AIDS, which it doesn't. And we needed a vaccine and on. It's just the whole, this is just watching the same thing all over again. But the point was that there was a huge amount of pressure applied to come up with a cure for AIDS. And there wasn't anything. So Burroughs Wellcome had a drug that they were using for chemotherapy, and it killed all the test animals. They didn't even bother to patent it. That's how bad it was. And Fauci had him revive that drug and try it on AIDS patients in a double-blind trial. Everybody knew who was taking it became AZT. That's the drug that it became. Everybody knew who was in the intervention group because they were vomiting blood and sick as a dog. But they got that approved anyway. And
that was a disaster.
This idea of using a second-class drug that doesn't work for COVID-19, that's just standard operating procedure based on what my research has shown about this.
So we've seen this movie before, so to speak, where they rescue something that was heading to the garbage pile and try it with something else, and hopefully it works. Yeah, that's great. Great strategy. I love that stuff. All right, well, let me show you how I got involved in this because I have nothing to do with healthcare. Many years ago, I did systems that were sort of the infrastructure behind protocol management. So for clinical trials, if you wanted to update the clinical trial protocol as it was being run all over the world, so to speak, and you needed to change the protocol. How the heck would you do that? And so I was building systems many years ago that would update protocols all over the world when clinical trials need to be changed. And I got to work on some crazy protocols like Clozaril for schizophrenia and stuff like that. So I got to work on some pretty crazy stuff. But that's it. So I'm a data guy and a computer guy and a map guy. And again, the mapping system is something that I helped architect many, many years ago. And so when I first took a look at it, I said, so wait a second, Dr. Tedros and the World Health Organization is declaring a global pandemic and there aren't 5 people dead in Shanghai? I found that kind of hard to connect.
Right. And by the way, we were being told that this was raging through China and that China was shutting everything down. That was the model. China was the model for what to do all over the world, and they had no choice but to do this to contain it, and the containment was successful. But I had video footage from some of the cities that were supposedly shut down that was real time, that was sent to me, showing that that's not exactly what was going on, not as represented.
Exactly. Well, and now we have the results. So as of now, there aren't 10 people dead in Shanghai.
And it's a huge city. Huge city.
24.5 million people. It's the largest city in China. And so if the largest city in China doesn't have 10 people dead, it's not even a question of like Dr. Tedros and declaring the global pandemic. It's a question of Anderson Cooper. How is this not news? Rachel Maddow, how is this not news? I'm looking at the Johns Hopkins map. This is the official map from Johns Hopkins, and there aren't 10 people dead in Shanghai. And I'm a conspiracy theorist? How the hell is that? No, I'm looking at your map, Mr. Johns Hopkins. By the way, it's the Michael Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins, just in case you were curious. Michael Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins. Okay.
Exactly. And by the way, this idea that when you bring up these anomalies and these things that don't make any sense, like why is it that so many people can be in a big box store, but 7 people in a flower shop is a disaster? I mean, you know, it really, none of this makes any sense. And it's amazing, first of all, that some people actually believed a lot of this nonsense, but I would not be able to get up and do a press conference every day and spew forth this nonsense with a straight face. I think I would find myself laughing because it is ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous, the things that have been proposed to people, and even more ridiculous that so many people went along with it.
Well, and to back it up, so in other words, the ridiculousness that you speak of, to me, is rooted in the map because I'm jaded, right? Because I'm a map guy. So I look at the map and I say, so wait a second, you're declaring a global pandemic. There's 100 million people in Vietnam, more than any country in Western Europe. More people in Vietnam than the UK, more people in Vietnam than Germany, more people in Vietnam than France, than Italy. There's no country in Western Europe with more people than Vietnam. They've got 100 million people, and 35 are dead today. A year ago, there was nobody dead. And so I'm sitting there going, what the hell are they doing? Is anybody looking anywhere other than Wuhan? Yes, I understand there's people sick in Italy. I get it. I hear there's people sick in Spain. But there's nobody dead in Vietnam. No one. This is a year ago. Now there's 35 people today. So again, my question to Anderson Cooper, to Rachel Maddow, to John Muir, how's this not a story? How is the fact that there's, I mean, again, this is not a, I'm looking at the Johns Hopkins map. Now here's Ireland. Ireland has 3,794 people dead as of February the 11th, okay, as of 2 weeks ago. The population of Ireland, 5 million people. Okay.
Which, how can you possibly reconcile that?
Well,
something is terribly wrong.
Well, the question is, how do you reconcile it with Burma, with Myanmar? So Myanmar has 3,181 people dead as of that date, as of 2 weeks ago. So if you look at 3181 compared to 3794, that's Ireland. Ireland only has 5 million people. Burma has 55 million people.
I know, it's unbelievable.
So
it's unbelievable.
So what do you attribute this remarkable success in Burma? The fact that Burma has fewer people dead than Ireland with 10 times the population. Did Burma do something that was remarkably different? Or is Burma's mask wearing and social distancing prowess so much better than what Americans are capable of?
No.
Okay.
No, this goes to the problem, which is that if you take a look at, and I can't remember the name of the agency, it's such an alphabet soup of federal agencies, but back when this all started in March, and you can still see this on YouTube, by the way, Deborah Birx talked about it. They've came up with a new system for categorizing deaths from COVID. And the document actually says, and we talked about this in our lawsuits, it says so as to categorize more death from COVID more often than not. And this was the famous discussion that happened. I mean, a lot of this stuff got taken down, but Deborah Birx was actually asked about this. So somebody gets hit by the proverbial bus and tests COVID with positive for COVID. So you're going to categorize that as a COVID death. And she said yes. And
I have the clip.
There were a couple of curious reporters around. The person said, so you realize they're not doing that in other countries? And she said, we realize that, but that's what we're going to do here. So
I have that clip.
White House press conference, she said that.
Yeah, I have the clip. I'm going to play the clip for the audience now. So for those of you who haven't seen the clip that Dr. Popper's referring to, let me play it for you. This is Dr. Birx, Deborah Birx, at a White House press briefing, explaining that the way that the United States counts the coronavirus deaths is generous, is the way she puts it. And we're going to take a look in a second at, well, what are the ramifications of that? So let me play that clip for the audience now.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem. Some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Can you be sure? I mean, you hear from coroners that that's not necessarily the case. Or are you sure? How can you be confident about that? And is there any concern that it skews?
All right. And now when we look at places like Nigeria, okay, Nigeria has over 200 million people, and there's not 2,000 dead. So Rhode Island has more people dead than Nigeria, and Nigeria has 200 million people.
Right.
So this begs the question. So was it mask wearing? What was it that they did in Nigeria with over 200 million people that there's fewer people dead in Nigeria than Ohio?
Right.
So this would be sort of the first question to Tom DeWine. I would say, so Tom, Nigeria's got 210 million people and fewer dead than Ohio, and you didn't pick up the phone?
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm sure that our little emperor, I call him the emperor because I don't think they act like governors anymore so much, but it all goes to this categorizing. There was an incentive to gin up the cases. There was an incentive to have all hospitalizations be labeled as COVID hospitalizations. So if you're there to have your knee replaced and you test positive for COVID, you're a COVID case, even though you're there for knee replacement. There were places around the country, by the way, where this did come out, some of this manipulation of the death certificates. And one place was Colorado. And I don't know if you heard about this, but in Colorado, a state representative got bent out of shape because he was hearing from constituents who said that they received letters from nursing homes that reported that their grandparent or whoever had been, the death certificate had been filled out properly, but then it was changed to COVID. And so this particular state representative threatened to have the health director indicted if those death certificates were not corrected. And the day that that adjustment was made, the death rate or the death count went down by like 20% just from going back and fixing the fraudulent nursing home death certificates in that just that had gone through the state rep. So, and then I'm sure you've seen some of the stories that they correct in the newspaper, but it's never the same amount of hysteria as when the death happened. So there was one in Florida, this young nurse supposedly died of COVID, and it was, oh, she was healthy and she was 32 or whatever, young person and blah, blah, blah. Well, later on, they found out that she had kidney problems and it was something else and it wasn't COVID. But you get this little tiny corrections, like one paragraph on page 37, whereas the front page news that had happened a few months ago was this young person, everybody's vulnerable, trying to scare, gin up the fear so that everybody would wear their masks and stand on circles and do all the other nonsense that we've all been asked to do.
And all I really want to do is just ask like some rational questions, right? I just want to get some basic answers to some what I think are just simple scenarios, right? Like I look at countries like France versus Thailand, and I say they've got the same population. So if we have two countries with the same population, and Thailand was the first place on earth where coronavirus showed up outside of Wuhan, so not even outside of China, it showed up in Thailand before it showed up in Shanghai. It showed up in Thailand before it showed up in Hong Kong. So, and yet, when we look at France with 80,000 people dead versus, let me go to, let's see, so Thailand, 80. 80,000, 80.
How can that be?
Right. So now, and Laos has no one dead. There's nobody dead in Laos. Cambodia has no one dead. Tanzania has 60 million people. And this guy's got a whole different approach to everything. And he's got 21 dead with 60 million people in Tanzania. So again, to Anderson Cooper, to Rachel Maddow, to John Muir, how's this not a story? How is the fact that Thailand has 1/1000th of the deaths of France? That's not relevant? That doesn't matter? You want to know about that? Right? So France has 65 million. Thailand's got 69 million. Thailand has 83 dead today, and France has 80,000 dead. But that's not a story. That's not a story. Let's talk about Kanye's getting divorced from Kim. That matters. So one of the reasons that I felt that it's important to talk about your work and to share this information with you is because so many doctors, so many professionals have found that, they're kind of taken aback by the fact that their credentials, their experience is being taken into question. Their integrity is being taken into question. In other words, a bunch of doctors, what do they do but help people and save people? And all of a sudden, the social media companies are portraying doctors as if they have some other agenda, which is kind of bizarre. And I think it's caught so many people off guard. So many physicians have had their YouTube channels taken down for simply sharing their observations and their opinions. And as a data guy, for me, it's just like, what? I'm just looking at numbers and making charts, and I don't know anything about what's happening other than the charts and the numbers that I'm looking at, that I'm getting from the CDC. But I feel this connection with doctors who are getting swatted down and now are experiencing ad hominem attacks. We had Dr. Scott Jensen on the show, and they went after his license in Minnesota for speaking out against the reimbursements that you were talking about. And I think he was the doctor that came forward and said, wait a second, the $13,000 just for an admission And then you triple it to 39 if we intubate them. And then if we get 100 admissions, we get a $77,000 bonus.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like I'm working at a Cadillac dealership. What's going on here? I mean, what is this? So he brought that forward, and they went after his license. And then Simone Gold, they arrest her using the capital argument, but she was on their radar. So the bottom line that I want to share with you is that I've been looking at the data about deaths, coronavirus deaths, not cases, not hospitalizations, not bed utilization. I don't care. I care about how many people are dying, where are they dying, okay, and who is dying. And where does coronavirus rank in the overall scheme of that group of people dying? Is it ruthlessly wiping them out, or is it an asterisk in the grand scheme of things killing people at that age? And so what I did was I started to look at P&I mortality versus coronavirus mortality. And I started to track previous years of P&I and looked at what happened coming into the coronavirus outbreak, and then started to look at the demographics and comorbidities of coronavirus. What I found is that there's more children in the United States that are drowning than dying from coronavirus. And in fact, there's more children, and I'm talking about school age, so from 5 to 14, there's more children in the United States that have died from asthma than coronavirus. And so, again, I find this rather confusing as a layperson, someone who's not from the medical community, not in health or nutrition. And so I just ask simple questions like, how many school-age kids have actually died with COVID? And it turns out, if we say, well, from 5 to 14 years old, the most recent data from the CDC says 72 kids. Now, if we look at that age group and we say, well, what about deaths from all causes? Over 5,000. What is it, 5,800? Mm-hmm. So COVID seems to be a rather small piece of the overall risk scenario for kids this age. And if only 72 kids have died in the United States between 5 and 14, why is it going to cost $180 billion to reopen the schools? Well, 72 kids died?
Well, again, none of this makes any sense. You're pointing out the problem. And by the way, and I'll tell you what I think has happened here. I think that for the last couple of decades, we've seen four things. There's a chapter in my book called The Perfect Storm. And you had to have four things going on in order to pull this off. All right. One is you had to have control over the media and guarantee that they would. You asked, why doesn't Anderson Cooper? Why doesn't Rachel Maddow talk about this? We have a remarkably not curious media that simply reports what they're told to report. And the five biggest broadcast networks took in, I think it was in 2019, they took in $51 billion in advertising from drug companies. So who's getting rich off of all of this, right? Drug companies, device makers, et cetera. So the media was part of it. The educational system, we have created generations of people who don't think. That's what we've produced through our education system, who watch what you're showing here, which is apparent to anybody who looks into it. I mean, part of the reason why I sometimes get impatient with people is if you would take the time to spend 15 minutes looking online or making a couple of phone calls, you would know something's seriously wrong. So people walking around saying, I believe them, I believe them. I mean, it's a level of ignorance that's just hard to fathom. Then you had to have a medical system that had been going in the wrong direction for decades. And the opioid epidemic was, I think, a big demonstration, which happened right before this, that medicine was going down a very bad path. And then you had to have a government that was corrupt beyond recognition. And those four things reached a pinnacle at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And it was the perfect storm for all this to have happened. And as we're working toward resolving this, trying to get our lives back, our government back, and our freedoms back, and everything else, I will share this with you for whatever it's worth. I think in April and May, I wanted my February life back. I actually felt that way. And I wasn't particularly depressed or anything. It's just like I wish that we could go back to that. But then I started thinking about it. In February, all this was going on that made the situation ripe for what you're looking at here. which is there's no data to back up anything that's going on. It's simply a method for controlling people. I don't ever want to go back to a time when that could happen again. So what I'm looking forward to is February of next year, when we've gotten a lot of this out of the way and we've started to put in insurance policies in the form of laws and that sort of thing that will never let it happen again.